and welcome to Ladies of Another View. I'm back. I'm joined today with Carmen and Jan, and we have Dr. Bryon Herbel with us. He's a psychiatrist, and we're gonna visit with him in just a minute about the state of psychiatry and the whole gender confusion and dysphoria. But before we do that, I want to just take a minute and mention that we won the Best of the Best again for the second year in a row. Now we've been thanking everybody last week, but I wanted to mention it again today because Jan and Carmen and I are three of the originals for Ladies of Another View. Mary Grainer is out in the field working on Jamestown, my hometown, or not Jamestown, Devil's Lake is coming up. And it means so much to us that our viewers voted us the best of the best 2 years in a row for Beck News and Sports. And we appreciate so much CEO Derek and the COO Jordan Hassler for their vision. We know so many times they were told, okay, what is it you want to do?
Right.
You know?
Right. And you know, I have to give a shout out too, I think, to the board of directors here. They're very forward looking, yes, and they wanted to be a part of, let's expose there are two sides to every coin. And let's give viewers in this country, in this part of the world, a second opinion on some things, and I think we do a lot of that here. It's not that we don't agree with some things, but we also like to bring out the other side for what you're hearing on mainstream versus what is maybe going on for some of us and some of our viewers, you know, with what's real and what's not.
That's just it. They aren't getting everything. We've kind of become the Paul Harvey of, you know, news and opinion. We're giving you the rest of the story. We're letting you know that there are things out there that you may not have heard of because it is suppressed. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank, we've had so many great guests, and we have a great guest on today because this is the rest of the story.
Yes.
So, Dr. Herbel, thank you for coming on today because it's a tough topic. We just want to tell the truth. We want to look at what's best for people. But, and we talk a lot about this topic. We talk about gender dysphoria. Can you explain what is that?
Gender dysphoria is a diagnostic construct that's focused on a person's individual experience. If you look at the language in one of the diagnostic criteria in psychiatry, the words they use are incongruence or preference or desire or dislike. So it's someone who It's a boy who dislikes having a penis because he wants to be a girl. Or it's a girl who is terrified at the idea of growing breasts because she wants to be a boy. Or it's a boy that wants to wear a dress or a girl that wants to play with trucks or be, you know, tomboyish. And so the focus of the diagnostic labeling is on an internal distress between how you see yourself in the world and how you are biologically.
So basically it's a disconnect, and there's other kinds of dysphoria, right? So there's gender dysphoria, but what other kind of dysphorias are there, just so that we can understand, wrap our head around it?
Well, one example commonly used is anorexia. So someone, a young woman may say, you know, I hate my body, I feel so fat, I need to lose weight, and there's a complete disconnect between the objective reality that she's very, very thin, and yet her self-perception is that she's grossly overweight. And so someone like that will go into activity that's very harmful, you know, starving or purging, or you wind up with a disconnect between the person's objective reality and how they perceive themselves. The tragic thing in my profession, in my opinion, is that psychiatrists will say, a woman who's 17 and weighs 80 pounds, who says she's fat, she needs treatment to correct that misperception. We need to work at getting your internal perception more in line with external reality. The tragic thing in gender dysphoria is there's been a shift. Instead of saying, let's focus on the reality of what your body is and bring your internal distress into line with reality, the train's gone the other way. Where now a lot of professionals, sadly, are saying, let's affirm your disordered perception and let's recommend blocking puberty, or let's recommend surgery, or let's recommend changing your body to fit what you feel like it should, as opposed to saying, well, let's look into why are you having this disordered disconnect between, you're a female. You may feel like you want to be a male. Well, let's talk about that. Let's try to understand, where do these feelings come from? Has there been a lack of validation of femaleness in your family? I mean, for example, in my performer career, I worked in a federal prison. We would have some people who had sexual confusion, and then we had one guy who was a cross-dresser. And so he described, as a boy, his father always favored his sister. And he became of the idea that it was just better to be a girl because he got treated harshly and rejected, but his sister got treated well. And so that'd be one example of, at least hypothetically, where he wanted to not be a woman, but to dress like a woman because he thought it was just better being female than male. So those are the kind of things that ought to be investigated if a child or a teenager or an adult says, I was born into the wrong body. I feel like I'm a woman in a man's body, or vice versa. What's the cause of the incongruity? As opposed to leaping on affirming, of course, your internal feelings are right, and we need to give you surgery or hormones to change your body to how you feel it ought to be.
First of all, I will say that when we took God out of everything, there is no absolute truth anymore. There is whatever you feel. It's right. And that's wrong as far as I'm concerned, and especially when you implement it on little children. And I'd like to know, you've said there's been a switch and kind of a movement, a different direction. At what point did it become okay? Because when you're really looking at just the facts and forget the emotion, because that's been what's taken over our whole narrative in our nation, is how do you feel? No, there's sometimes where you need to look at reality, and reality is, when did it change from being child abuse to being puberty blockers, and it's all okay, and when you're 7 you can do this, when you're 10 we don't need to tell your parents, we can take you to clinics, we can do these things. When did that change, and how did that change in your estimation?
There's a long answer and a short answer. The shorter answer is there seems to have been a number of processes building on each other over a period of decades. And so it's not just a one-time thing, but that the wish to have control over all aspects of our domain has been a long-standing problem. And if you look at the history of philosophy, there's been 2 ways of viewing reality, or how do I know anything? And one assumption is there's an external reality, and my perception is to align with the reality. And the more my perception aligns with the reality, the better I can navigate this. A completely different idea is there is no reality, it's all what I internally perceive. Some argue, goes back to Descartes, I think, therefore I am, that thought actually drives reality, or I organize perception based on how my synapses work. And so there's 2 radically different philosophical approaches to how do you know anything, how do you prove anything, what's real. And the weight of Christianity has been linked more into the natural law tradition, common sense. What's out there is real, and we perceive it. And that's then eroded away the past 70 years or so with advances in science, with the idea of some advanced physics theories that matter isn't real, that it's all energy, it moves around and nothing's permanent, it's all how we perceive. The advances in medical technology where we can all of a sudden alter things, change things, a greater human tolerance out of compassion that people may be suffering things we didn't realize before. There's been a march for decades, maybe even centuries, that sort of permitted us to unfold where we are now, where the essential assertion is that external reality doesn't matter. Where I see that really taking traction in the popular culture has been incorporation into law via primarily Supreme Court decisions, where it's the subjective assessment of your state that matters, not the objective reality.
So yeah, and it's crazy because there is certainly an agenda, because why is it just gender dysphoria? Nobody is putting anorexic patients on diet. They are not getting confused with reality, being the disconnect there. But it's funny how the transgender thing, like they just took hold of that and they went off in a in a crazy direction that's not really helping patients when you play along with their confusion. Welcome back to Ladies of Another View on Back, and we welcome back our guest, Dr. Bryon Herbel. He spent 25 years working as a psychiatrist in a North Carolina prison, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But we wanted to just keep talking a little bit about this whole gender dysphoria, because one point we talked about during the break is that it isn't just a patient feeling this way. What we're seeing in our society are counselors and teachers and even parents sometimes trying to convince them you might actually be a different sex in your own body. You know, that sometimes the idea comes not from them but from the outside.
Well, exactly. And when you look at our public schools as well, I mean, it's written all over into the curriculum. And so when our kids are hearing about that all the time in the social emotional learning piece of our curriculum, and we've allowed it in North Dakota and other states, but what does that do long term to these kids, you know, when they start, you know, sometimes you hear about it in preschool, you know, and so, you know, and now there's a lot of children's books out there that kids can get from libraries to read about how to explain all this and make it normal. And long term, what is it doing to our children? It's hard to watch and feel kind of helpless.
You're right, that pressure is there. And I know in Bismarck Public Schools, they have in their policy manual that the teachers and the staff are to ask the children what their pronouns are, and they are to use their pronouns when they speak to the children. And if the children don't know what that is because they're in first grade and don't have any idea what a pronoun is yet because they haven't been taught it, they are still asked to provide it. So, and if the teachers don't know or the staff doesn't know what the children's pronouns are, they are to call them they, them. And how confused could a child be? This almost seems like abuse to me.
What does it do to their mental health?
What comes to mind in this discussion is the controversy over the so-called false memory syndrome, whereas the expectation by a professional can have a vulnerable subject have false memories of something that didn't happen as if it did happen. And so again, children's minds they're like soft wax. They can be formed or malformed depending upon the attitudes of the adults around them. And so this is where this ideology is so deadly, toxic, and corrosive, that if an individual person has this internal anxiety or disconnect or intense distress, well, that's something that should be treated, listened to carefully and treated, but not affirmed and said, this is good and this is healthy, this is normal. You're putting the wrong kind of emphasis on affirming something that's disordered. Now, many of my own colleagues might not agree with my language, but my own personal opinion as someone who's had a long life experience and has a sense of what's true, fair, and just is that what's being pushed by encouraging a 12, 13-year-old to take puberty block, it's just a mistake. It's experimental treatment. There's been no long-term side effects. There's false out in the media, these treatments are being affirmed as being, oh, this is safe, there's no side effects. Those are lies. It's not true. It is not true.
Thank you. Can you repeat that? Those are lies.
Those
right?
are lies.
And that's why we have a show like this, because it's so frustrating that they're all agenda driven, they're lies, and that there are side effects and people are suffering, but because we're being brainwashed. And a big part of your profession is part of the brainwashing, right?
A big part of my profession, I'm very disappointed with my profession. There's one man that I admire greatly is a former Johns Hopkins professor called Dr. Paul McHugh. Maybe you know of his work.
Yes.
He's been a solo voice saying that these people who are searching for and pushing the transgender agenda are doing harm. It's not healthy, it's not good, it will not stand in the long run. That people who have this internal incongruence and seek the transition with therapy or drugs do get some degree of satisfaction from a different body. They're aligning their body to their internal expectations. That gives them a little bit of satisfaction. The long-term mental health problems persist, and the suicide rates are high, generally. And so if the panacea was really effective and safe, had great results, you wouldn't see these mental health comorbidities. And now there are medical comorbidities with women becoming men having a higher risk of stroke or heart attack. I mean, if you look at the medical complications, 5, 10, 15 years down the line, they're not negligible.
Mm-hmm. And isn't underneath it, we've been doing a lot of work here as well. What all is being done to just dismantle the nuclear family as an institution that built our country, that built our society, and what all of this adds to that picture as far as the confusion and pretty soon you get the factions going against each other, and families just break down. Have you seen that going on much?
Well, anyone who sees that the culture and the shifts over past few decades can't help but recognize that. To what degree it's a trend being advocated by powerful interests that want that to happen specifically, or to what extent it's a downstream consequence of some moral laxities that have multi-generational consequences. I mean, whether it's accidental or deliberate, another, you could argue that certainly, but I see the same phenomena. And again, I think it goes back to collapse of natural law. Yes. That there is, again, and natural law is based on there's an objective reality, there's an objective order that's good. And we flourish as human beings if we acknowledge and surrender to this natural ordering.
So I want to kind of piggyback on what Carmen said, because you have all these years of experience. So have you seen any effect with the prison population based on the disruption or the breakdown of the nuclear family? A lot of these folks, I'm assuming, do not have the mother-father situation. It's one parent or the other.
I would see men who are at the end result of that phenomena. The people who can speak best to that are sociologists who look at risk factors for young males going into pro-social versus antisocial behavior. Okay. And not having a father in the family is one of the high risks of criminality. Not finishing school, high risk criminality. Okay. And there's all these kind of risk factors that your grandmother could tell you, sure, this is not going to end well.
Mm. I was just going to ask, the DSM-5, did that add a lot of information or diagnoses, disorders as far as dysphoria, different types of dysphoria, or what were the major changes with the DSM-5?
And that's the book you're holding, right?
I was just going to say,
yeah.
That's what you use to diagnose patients, right?
Yeah, so every so often, my field goes through a revision of what do you call certain disorders? And that's a nebulous quantity. One of my faculty members in medical school said that psychiatric diagnosis is like naming clouds. You can kind of name the ones that are extreme, but a lot of in between stuff you don't quite know. Is this abnormal or normal, or how does this differ from that? And so the experts in the field go through factor analyses and try to define better diagnoses and how they sort of hang together genetically, biologically, and there's a lot of. It's a complicated field. The problem is that there are some disorders that have a more obvious mental health picture than others. So, for example, schizophrenia, somebody who's hallucinating, neglecting themselves, engaging in all kinds of bizarre behavior out of reality. You treat them with medicine and they get better. That's one kind of condition, and that's in here. Pedophilia is a different condition. You can have all kinds of normal behavior, but you have a deviant sexual interest in children. But that's also a diagnosis that's in here, and yet it's not a mental disorder in the same way that schizophrenia would be. And so the people who write these manuals have a lot of competing interests and to try to arrive at a final product that's acceptable to a broad part of the field, and they do well or poorly depending upon your point of view.
So yeah, we've run out of time, but the point is there's a certain amount of power just based on their opinion, right?
There's a huge amount of power
Right.
based on opinion.
So like what used to be a mental diagnosis now is maybe not, or what used to be unhealthy, a disconnect, like now, oh no, this, the treatment is seen as, different treatment because we're the problem, they're not the problem.
Right.
Hi, welcome back to Ladies of Another View. I'm Beck. And even though I did say goodbye to Dr. Herbel, he's here again because he agreed to stay. We are going to continue to talk about this topic, and it would be helpful if we get a little bit of his insights because we want to talk about a case in Connecticut where some female athletes are suing. The opening arguments began last week in the Court of Appeals, U.S. Court of Appeals, because originally their case was thrown out. But it was decided that these girls have been rightfully denied titles, scholarships, the ability to compete. And the two men who have taken those said, no, we deserve these titles. So they said, okay, we agree, we're going to start hearing arguments on it. So they agreed to hear the case. And we're going to watch just a little clip about that, and then we'll talk about it.
That particular executive order is a tremendous overreach of the federal government into the states. I will say that. I'll also say that I do believe that transgenders participating in women's sports will destroy women's sports. It will ruin the opportunity for girls to earn scholarships. It will put a glass ceiling back over women that hasn't been there, and sometimes I think it's bad for women and for women's sports.
Actually, over a two-year period, these two boys took over 15 state championship titles from otherwise deserving girls.
Yeah, and Kristen, I want to follow up too, because I was going to come to you on this point. In part of the pushback or legal defense, science has been quoted. How does that work? What exactly are you saying?
Well, feelings can't change reality, and while ADF has been at the forefront of this issue, we're aligned with a broad coalition on the left and the right that recognizes there are real legitimate differences between the sexes. And when the law doesn't recognize those differences, it's primarily women and girls that take the brunt of that harm. And that's what we're seeing in Connecticut. And the Biden order nationalizes that harm.
Alliance Defending Freedom is ADF, and they are representing the girls. And Dr. Herbel, you mentioned that there are sometimes long-term consequences that people don't even consider. And this is one of them.
Indeed, indeed. It creates a madness that in the idea of being compassionate towards someone's internal state of a transgender dysphoric may be causing a lot of distress. The idea we have to sort of remake all of our rules for everybody to accommodate a handful of troubled people is, it's the idea you have the people who are troubled, all of a sudden they're calling the shots on the normal people. Mm-hmm. And there's this ripple effect of insanity. And I would have to agree with the attorney that was making that argument that this is going to destroy women's sports. How could it not?
The fact that we can have a president, and I don't care who the president is, that institutes something by executive order that affects all the girls' sports in all of the states of this nation is wrong. I mean, maybe Connecticut wanted that. Maybe New Jersey wants that. Maybe North Dakota doesn't. We had no choice. If we're, of course, it's always tied to dollars, of course. But like you say, as those women athletes or those girl athletes, now you get into the whole bullying piece or the whole you're not compassionate and you're not understanding and you're not being nice and all the things for these boys that I'm supposed to now call girls that are now taking the trophies away from me that I have worked for years. How do I process that as a female, that it's okay, that somehow I need to learn to get used to this and make it normal in my life? How do you deal with that? I mean, I'd be the girl coming to see you going, I can't get over this.
If I were your therapist, my response would be, you have suffered an injustice. And I would affirm the injustice of what's been done to you. And then dealing with that. But I would not gaslight you and say, well, you need to celebrate this event because I don't see it being celebrated.
Oh my. You know, the girls that started out in girls' sports kind of are at the mercy of all of these folks because they keep getting the news, they keep getting the attention, and they keep getting their way. And I'm not sure that I see a safe or fast way to put the brakes on this, because the girls that are standing up for themselves, they're being ridiculed, they're being pressured, and you know, it's all about the feelings or the injustice for the trans people versus the girls that are trying to say, whoa, I don't want a boy changing next to me in the girls' locker room. How do we fight this?
There's different organizations who are gathering together in an attempt to address this politically. And so I would encourage any of the viewers to get involved in those kind of groups.
Well, for instance, those 4 girls, they're not just, they're saying, no, we are going to fight this. This is not fair. So Chelsea Mitchell, 4 times, she was the fastest girl in the state, the fastest female. Not anymore, because it's taken over by a boy. And we saw with Leah Thomas, was at University of Pennsylvania, do I have the school right?
I think so.
Where he was a mediocre male swimmer, and then he took all the titles as a female swimmer, and the coach just told the girls they need to not complain, they need to accept him. And I think, what is wrong with the world? There's a lot of people, that's why we have a show like this. This is why we have viewers that are saying this is insanity. But it shocks me. Dr. Herbel, maybe you can explain, like, is there some kind of mass psychosis going on? How do so many people play along when anybody, a child, could look at this and say, yeah, that's not fair?
It's ultimately a appeal and a bullying using misplaced compassion. Okay, and so it's not that I'm harsh because I'm saying this isn't real. Reality is harsh. Okay, and the better, again, speaking as someone who believes in natural law and that there is objective reality, we have to surrender to that and yield to that and learn to work with that. And males and females are different. I mean, you talk to any biologist and they'll say they're not the same. They're not interchangeable. You can't modify one and make up for all the differences of the chromosomal effects. You can't do it.
Right.
You know what I want? I want a big poster. Reality is hard. Reality, yeah, it's reality. It's not us.
Yep.
We're just can't deny reality. That's all. Thank you for staying on for one more segment,
Yes,
Dr.
thank
Herbel.
you so much.
Appreciate it.